Hello and welcome to another Moog demo library. In today's video, we're going to be exploring Labyrinth, and in particular, we're going to look at some of the interesting ways that we can make sequencer 1 and sequencer 2 interact with each other. So for the sound in this example, I'm going to be using the main VCO. I have it fed into the wave folder, and then I have the order switch set so that the wave folder runs into the filter. That means that this blend control is going to smoothly mix between the output of the wave folder and then a filtered output of the wave folder. I'm also going to be using the mod VCO in this example to modulate the biasing of the wave folder, and you might ask yourself how I'm doing that because there's no patch point in the patch bay for VCW bias. But a trick that I can do is if I have the mod VCO set to sub-audio rates, then if I mix that LFO modulation in with my VCO in the mixer, the LFO is going to be pushing around the biasing of the wave folder, so we'll get this nice animated tone. The other thing that I want to ensure is that anything that I want modulated from a sequencer is going to be coming from sequencer 1. So that means I'm going to have to replace the EG1 modulation going into the VCF. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the sequencer 1 CV, I'm going to feed it into the UMix2 input in the patch bay, and then I'm going to take the UMix1 plus 2 output, and I'm going to feed that to the cutoff. Now I still want a little bit of envelope modulation on the filter, so the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the EG1 output and I'm going to feed that into the UMix1 input. Now the UMix circuit in the patch bay is a little utility mixer, and the way it works is that anything going into the UMix2 input is a unity gain mix, so it's just going to come in full strength, and anything that I feed into UMix1 is going to be controlled by this attenuator here that says UMix1 level, so that will get blended into whatever is being fed into UMix2. Now in this case, what I'm doing is I'm feeding my sequencer voltage full strength into the filter, and then I'm also going to use the UMix1 level to add a little bit of envelope modulation in with the sequencer modulation. And then you'll notice on this attenuverter next to the filter, it says EG1/CV amount. The reason that CV amount is there is it means that anything that's plugged into the cutoff is going to cancel the normalization of EG1. So now I've added EG1 back in using the UMix, but I have sequencer 1 modulating the filter. Now the setup that I'm going to do for the sequencer is interesting because I'm going to begin by setting sequencer 2 to 7 steps. That means that the two sequencers are going to have a polymetric relationship where every time we go through a loop on sequencer 1, sequencer 2 is going to get shifted a step forward, so their relationship is going to shift after every loop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bit flip position 1 on sequencer 2. So if I hit the advance button, I can see that there is a gate present in sequencer 2. Now I'm going to go to the patch panel and I'm going to take the sequencer 2 trig output and I'm going to feed that into the bit flip 1 input. So the bit flip buttons are always used in the sequencer to turn gates on or off, and anytime we turn a gate on, a random pitch gets assigned to that gate. And that pitch is determined by however we have our quantizer set at the current moment. So what it means now is that sequencer 1 is going to get populated by sequencer 2 with each loop because this one bit that we have on in sequencer 2 is going to turn bits on in sequencer 1, and because of that polymetric relationship, over time it's going to fill in sequencer 1 and then fully remove all of the gates, and we'll get this really interesting behavior. So let's take a moment and hear how that sounds. So as you can see, we get this behavior that feels almost generative because the way that the sequencers work is anytime a gate gets flipped on, a random pitch gets assigned. So now it feels like sequencer 2 is essentially rewriting sequencer 1, but we're getting this generative pitch movement because of the way it's turning on and off gates. Now if we wanted something to not just be one gate gets added, one gate gets removed with each loop, we can then add more bits on sequencer 2. So I'm going to turn a second bit on and a third bit on right next to it, and let's hear how that sounds. So as you can hear, we can get this really interesting behavior where sequencer 2 is writing sequencer 1 for us. Now, another thing that we can explore is if we turn the corrupt up past 50%, then sequencer 2 is going to start rewriting its own gates, but still, anytime a gate is on, it's going to flip a bit on sequencer 1. So now we'll get a slightly more generative behavior in terms of the gate distribution on sequencer 2, but those are still going to have an influence on sequencer 1. So let's hear how that sounds. So as you can hear, it just gets us into very interesting territory, and if you want to, you can push this further by using a drum machine or some sort of external gate source and feeding bit flips into both sequencers to get all sorts of interesting generative movement, depending on how you want to set it up. But if you're struggling with coming up with ideas, Labyrinth is an excellent way to let the sequencer do the work for you and arrive at something that sounds interesting, and then be able to store that by just pulling the bit flip connection out on the patch bay, turning corrupt down, holding the buffer button to capture anything. But this can just be a really nice way to work with Labyrinth to generate ideas for you.